Thank you.
Thank you, Donna.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Mr. Ford. Thank you so much for joining us and opening EcoMotion. I think this is really something to celebrate, and we are so looking forward to hearing your thoughts. And I think we couldn't have had anyone better to open this convention, because you are so passionate about mobility and sustainability, innovation, and driving change in this industry. Of course, you all know that Mr. Ford is the great son of Henry Ford, and he was best known for putting the world on wheels with the Model T and inventing the moving assembly line that literally sparked an industrial revolution. And fast forward today, you are here with us because you are calling for the next revolution and reimagining what mobility means for modern life, and we'll talk about that this morning. But I want to start with Israel. First of all, to say welcome.
Thank you.
And I know it's your first time here, so I wanted to ask you if you could share with us your initial thoughts. And let me tell you, in Israel, we're very frank.
Well, first of all, I love the energy and creativity here. I brought my whole family. We've been out seeing the sites and been actually all over the country and have enjoyed every minute of it. But I think actually the most meaningful time I spent was at the Perez Center last night for Peace and Innovation. Because not only was Shimon Peres one of the most inspirational people of my lifetime, but the notion of innovation and peace coming together and having peace through innovation, to me, is fascinating. There are many institutions that promote innovation. There are also many more that promote peace. But actually melding them together in the way that the Perez Center does is something that I think is unique and incredibly hopeful for mankind. So I loved that.
So great. We'll talk about Israel a bit later, but the theme of this year's EcoMotion is exploring how we push smart mobility towards the tipping point of change. Now, mobility is not a novel idea to you. I think you were one of the first who were talking about it, even though you were working in a car manufacturing industry. Can you share with us how you became interested in that topic?
Yes, so I've kind of had two big moments in my professional career. The first was on the environment, because I thought our industry was headed in the wrong direction, and I spoke out loudly about that early in my career, and I got criticized quite a bit within our industry for that. And then the second was in 2011, I gave a TED Talk about our business model being broken, because with us going to 9 billion people on the planet, cities already in many ways ungovernable in terms of traffic, we couldn't expect to continue on that way with any kind of success for society and ultimately for individual companies. Once again, I was met with a lot of skepticism. But I saw this coming, and I started my own venture capital firm in 2009 to start investing in startups that were going to provide solutions to this. And here we are today, and it's all happening, and everything about our business is changing. There isn't one piece of our business that is recognizable or will be recognizable compared to the past. And it's driven by all the usual things that this room knows so well, artificial intelligence and things like 3D printing and autonomous driving, and all those things are ultimately changing the very, very nature of what we think of as mobility and transportation.
And I'm just thinking about your great-grandfather saying that everyone should own a car, and here you are coming and saying, no, we should share cars. I mean, how do you do that when you go back to the board?
Well, because I think my great-grandfather would have been the first to recognize that the world was changing dramatically, and that in many ways, he was the original disruptor. I mean, there was an old, saying of his. He said, if I'd asked my customer what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. And so he would have loved, I think, today. But I don't spend a lot of time thinking about what he would have loved because it's in some ways that's not relevant. What's relevant is how are we, all of us in this room, going to change this world? And we have a tremendous opportunity to make people's lives safer, more enjoyable, more fun. Providing medical care to people in a mobile sense, moving food more easily around, food distribution, all these things. The flip side of that, though, is if we let technology run it and we don't keep people at the very center of everything that we do, we could end up with a bit of a dystopian society that I think nobody wants. So technology is going to enable a lot of wonderful things, but we have to be really careful and very mindful that it must be to benefit each individual life and society as a whole.
So that's very interesting, because I think whenever you deal with technology, you're always thinking about the fact that it can take over. When it comes to Ford and your vision, how do you make sure you don't go too far with technology and forget man behind?
Well, it's interesting, even in the auto business, back in kind of our 1.0 world, there were times when technology was introduced before customers either valued it or even knew what it was, and it didn't work very well. And so I think as we enter this very, very different new world, we have to always ask ourselves, is this making people's lives, better, safer, more enjoyable, all the things? Are we giving people time back in their lives? All the things that people will value. And if the answer is no, we're actually confusing people or complicating their lives, then we probably need to rethink it.
So you always have to ask the questions about people before you move on.
Absolutely.
We're in an environment with a lot of startups here, which is amazing. It fills my heart with joy to see all these great minds thinking of making the world better. I'm not cynical. I know journalists are, but I really am excited to be here this morning. But there is a sense that disruptors can be startups, and here you are, with this gigantic corporation, and you want to leap in and also be a disruptor. How do you do that?
Well, we don't have to be the disruptor. We have to encourage disruptors and then partner with them. I mean, some of the disruption will be internally, for sure. We've got a great R&D capability, and we've got incredibly talented and curious minds working on some of these problems. We could talk about autonomy, then we talk about a third dimension, which is, flight and on, and even space. But a lot of it will come from people like everybody in this room, because any corporation that thinks they have all the answers is A, arrogant, or B, ignorant, because there's no way. And it's very hard, though, for a lot of young companies to know how to partner with big companies. You can get lost in the bureaucracy. You can find it very hard to have anybody listen to you. You can get very frustrated by the delay in time. And that's something that we're working really hard on at Ford, as I suspect other car companies are. How do we become much more responsive to startups and really create the kind of ecosystem that we're a part of, that we're not necessarily the epicenter of?
And also there's a change in the role of companies versus cities, for example, when we look at the future of mobility. What do you think about that in Ford? What is the model that you're thinking of?
Well, it's interesting. You mentioned cities. So we have a whole city solution group that works just with cities. Well, why is that? Well, cities are ground zero for all the transportation challenges that we face. But interestingly, each city is very different. They start with a different set of transportation assets. They have a different infrastructure, different ability to pay for things. And so we're working with cities to say, hey, let us help sort out your transportation issues, because there are going to be some similarities for sure. There are also going to be some unique challenges that each city has. And one thing that we find that is helping us a lot as Ford is that people trust Ford. And in this new world, I think trust is incredibly important. And that's something that I, again, never want to lose sight of is trust. Because as we adopt new technology, you're asking customers, trust that this new technology will help you. Trust that this new technology will be safe. Trust that this is all going to work. And we find, at least my strong hypothesis is, if they trust the company that's asking those questions, you've got a real leg up. And so we spent 116 years now in our history gaining that trust. You can lose it very quickly, and we're very cognizant of that. But I think trust is hugely important. It's important that cities trust us, too.
And trust, I think, is the basic element that's going to be hard for people to adopt when they move to AVs, when they have to think of giving up the steering wheel. And you're saying basically, well, the fact that we have this tradition and we have your trust is going to be an asset, even though they're startups are
well, it's an asset if we do it well. I mean, I think the trust is something that gives us, an entree point that's going to be very important. But from then on, it's up to us to continue to earn that trust. And so, that's why one of the questions people always ask is on AVs, when are you going to have them? And, my answer is when they're ready. Because, we can't be like so many software things, about 70% right, and then, fix it on the fly. We're dealing with people's lives here, and we have to be absolutely ready that these are ready for prime time, in all conditions. So you're going to see them rolled out, in kind of more controlled environments before we get to unfettered autonomous driving.
But when you say you want to do it right and you want to make sure that it's working 100%, other companies are moving ahead of you. So some people say you're losing the market because you're not at pace.
I don't agree with that. Our self-driving system, Argo, we think is incredibly competitive. My only point, though, is, getting back to the trust factor. So on the technology side, I think we're right in there with the very best in terms of time of development. But I also think that we want to take great care before we let people in these vehicles. So what does that mean? Well, we're going to have lots of pilots on the road, starting very soon. In fact, some of them have already started. And you'll see them driving around cities around the world. But before we turn them loose and have retail customers in them, we just want to make sure that this is absolutely ready.
Now, people think that AV is going to change the way that we drive, but literally it's going to change the way we live. I mean, when you look at it from a manufacturing point of view, it changes the whole business.
Of course it
opens
does.
up so many other opportunities.
Well, it changes everything. It changes delivery options. I mean, it's not just moving people, it's moving goods, it's moving healthcare. There are lots of tails to this that will change everything. So, one of the things that you hear a lot about in the startup community is the last mile of delivery, last mile of people moving. Lots of terms. Micromobility is a term that we use a lot. But this solving the very last piece of any journey, whether it's for a package or a delivery or a human being, becomes a really interesting question. And there are lots of companies in this room that are working on pieces of that, if not the entire piece of it. And so, when we think about this whole transportation ecosystem, there are so many pieces to it, starting with public transport, working down to, drones and robots and everything, working on that last little bit. It's fascinating. And I think it's the most exciting time in my career. I wish I was 20 years old again. I really do. It's awesome. You think of our industry, it didn't change much for most of our, let's say, our first 100 years. My great-grandfather would have walked into Ford Motor Company, and he would have, on year 100, he would have recognized the company. I mean, obviously, we've come a long way. We'd had a lot of evolutions. We hadn't had many revolutions. Now, it's all changing, and I think it's fantastic. And the company that gets it right and that integrates all this technology in a way that enhances people's lives are going to be the companies that win.
When you say get it right, what do you think needs, I mean, this is the $100 million whatever dollar question. What should it take to get it right? What should you do I mean, I'm sure our audience is curious to know what milestones should you put on the way to make sure you're on the right direction?
Well, look, it's almost infinite. I mean, you could start with AVs like we're talking about. We're talking about safety and routing and all those things, but then you quickly go to things like content in a vehicle. So if you're not driving, how do you want to be entertained? Do you want to be entertained? How do you want the lighting? Do you want the vehicle to stop and pick you up a coffee on the way? I mean, there are lots of different permutations of this that will develop simultaneously, not sequentially. And we're going to have lots of different experiments. We'll get it wrong many times. And in fact, if we're not getting it wrong, it means we're not iterating quickly enough. But at the end of the day, so there's so many elements of this, it's almost staggering, and that's why no company can do it alone. That's why we need the ecosystem of things like EcoMotion, because so much of what's happening here is going to inform our future.
Yeah, I mean, we we all grew up owning a car and driving ourselves, and we're going to, I think in 4 or 5 years, hopefully, we're going to share cars that drive themselves. But you mentioned the TED Talk in 2011, and when you were talking about this big change, but you were also, I think, one of the pioneers, certainly bringing it into Ford or into this industry, talking about sustainability. It was since day one that you were in Ford that you were talking about a mission of building a bridge between environmentalists and the business community. How many eyebrows were raised
Well, I wasn't
at the
very
boardroom
popular.
when you came up with this notion?
Well, in fact, when I joined the board back in the 80s, I was told, dead seriously, to stop associating with any known or suspected environmentalists. That seemed to me so crazy.
And then you went and became a keynote speaker at a Greenpeace conference.
Yeah,
right?
I was the first NGO, much less the first industrialist ever to address that conference. And I don't know who was more freaked out, the NGO community or the people back in Dearborn. But yeah, I've always believed in pushing the envelope because I think the world changes quickly and each generation has different demands. And if we don't anticipate those demands and stay ahead of the game, then we're going to be consigned to the dustbin of history. And that doesn't interest me at all.
Which brings me to your personal story, because actually, was there ever a choice for you? I mean, on the one hand, you are a descendant of the Ford, and from your mother's side, it's Firestone industry. So literally, you were born into the auto industry. Did you ever have a possibility of doing something else, or you knew that's where you wanted to go?
Well, it's interesting you asked that. The short answer is I don't know. I felt this inexorable pull, but even in college, I never thought I was going to end up working here. And I remember playing pool with my father in our basement. And my dad said to me when I was a senior in college, well, what are you going to do next? And I had interviewed in New York for different jobs. And I said, well, I don't know. I'm thinking I should maybe try Ford because everything I have in life is from Ford. And Ford at that time was going through a bit of a crisis. So I thought naively I could go help. My dad, remember, said to me, well, don't do it on my account or anybody else's, because if your heart isn't in it, you're not going to do a good job, and you're not going to do yourself or the company any favors. So I thought I would try it for a year. Here I am 40 years later, and I'm still trying it. So, I've loved it. I don't think it was preordained. In fact, in my generation, I'm 12th out of 13 age-wise. So there were, I was probably the least likely to succeed in some ways.
And the interesting thing is that you made your way up. You didn't look for any shortcuts or, did look for the highway. You really worked from the bottom.
Yeah, I worked in the assembly plant. I changed my name to go work on the assembly line.
Really?
Yeah.
Why, you thought it would be hard to be a Ford working on the assembly line?
I thought the treatment I would get would be very different, let's put it that way. But yeah, I wanted to learn this business the right way.
What name did you take?
It wasn't very creative. I used my middle name, but nobody figured it out. But it was, I've really enjoyed my career. I've one of the nice things about starting at the bottom of it, and also because I was, again, 12th out of 13, I don't think many people paid attention to me, really, even with the last name. So it allowed me to be friends with people at all levels of the company that even to this day, I can call people who give me the real story, and I don't just get the filtered version that comes up through management.
Let's go back to Israel, because you are here for the EcoMotion, and we thank you for that, but you're also opening tomorrow a Ford Research Center in the heart of Tel Aviv's tech community. And this is after you've had an initial investment last year at SAIPS. What is it about Israel? What are you looking for here, and why Israel?
Well, if you just, what I was saying a minute ago about the ecosystem that's here already, it's fantastic. And the energy here, what I loved is, you and I were talking about this before we got on stage. The egalitarian part of Israel I find fascinating. The lack of a hierarchy here, which seems to be born of the
See, everyone's smiling when you say that.
Military service. But I love that. And I think that really sparks innovation in a way that a lot of Western, particularly European and American companies, which tend to be more hierarchical, unknowingly stifle innovation. But the fact that Israel has a lack of hierarchy, I think makes it a really great place to start up and have your voice heard early on in the process. To me, that's really interesting. And of course, one of the things that I had a long talk with yesterday at the Perez Center is that necessity being the mother of innovation. You've had starting in this country, with your natural resources not being great, having to figure out farming and water and all the way to your defense system, and now through the startup community. It's a fantastic breeding ground for innovation.
And I'm sure tomorrow you'll have some more information on what you're looking for. You mentioned the Paris Center. So Paris had a saying about this. He said that Israel is not a land that blessed the people, but it's the people who bless the land. And I think that gives a lot of understanding of this ecosystem. So finally, let's get to the question everyone is waiting for. And could you share a piece of advice from your history, from your company's history, with companies, innovators and startups? What is that secret sauce to get them to success?
Well, it's interesting. I suspect everybody in this room already knows this, but it is persistence, because you got to keep knocking on doors and trying to knock down the doors to make it work. And it's as much as I say that companies like ours are trying to be receptive to startups, and we really are. It still requires real persistence and a real belief, a heartfelt belief in what you're doing, that what you're doing is really going to help change the world. And if you believe that and you're persistent, eventually you're going to get your ideas sold and heard. And to me, that's the most important thing, more than the idea itself. But you have to always ask yourself, is my idea, is my company, is my perception helping make people's lives better, and is it going to change the world in a positive way? And if you can answer that yes, then just stay with it.
Mr. Ford, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank
and
you.
we're
Thank
really
you, Donna.
lucky and happy to have you here in Israel, and enjoy your stay. Toda rabah, and thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. No, thank you so much.
Toda rabah.